In this particular unit 6, we are going to cover workflows and workflows related escalations. We will see how these workflows are configured in the backend, and we will also see how these escalation work and how these escalations are defined in the system. So let's go into the system. So in the system, you will first give manage org and job structures. In manage org pay and job structure, in the left hand you will say workflow, and you will open any workflow right now. So let me open transfer workflow. If you see this workflow, this has got a workflow ID. So workflow ID can be defined anything. Workflow name, then it has got a description. So the where the workflow is going, it is defined here like manager's manager, and then HR representative, and then finance, whatever. You can define anything in the description. Reminding days is like when the workflow should be reminded to the user. So you can define the reminding days here. So for example, I define 3 days. Is delegate supported? Whether the delegation is supported on this workflow or not. So usually we define all the workflows with delegate supported functionality. If there is any alternate workflow, you can define it there, but usually we don't need this. Escalation, you can define the escalation here. So let's say if there is any escalation, so I will say for example, for promotion without pay change, the escalation is defined. So I can use this escalation, and I will define this one. Redirect CC users to workflow approval page. So this is like when they receive the email, at that time they be directed to the workflow approval page, yes or no. That you can define it here. Now in the step 1, you can see step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. You can define as many steps as you want. But in the step 1, you can see there is approver type, approver role, context, edit transaction, no approver behavior, relationship to approver, respect permission, and workflow. So let's just see this workflow email configuration. So let's go to the left and let's see. So in the approver type, you can define the approver as role, dynamic group, position, and position relationship. So here currently it is defined as parent position, position relationship, and approver role is defined as parent position. Since it is a position, it will open all the position related um, fields. So like position, parent position relationship, it is position or it should be a parent position. And then source is whether context is source or target. So whether it is at whether it should be target parent position or it should be a source to parent position. Then edit transaction will have edit with route change. So you can define whether you want to define if you want to change the route, you can give this authority to parent position owner. So you can define it edit with route change, edit without route change, edit attachments only. So I am giving it authority edit with route change. If the approver is not available, then skip this particular behavior, skip this step. Then relationship to approver initiator position, and then respect permission no, and then workflow email configuration. So if you have any custom configuration emails which needs to be configured for this workflow, you can define those email configuration. Like for example, for maternity leave, they have a different workflow email configuration, so they have defined a different workflow configuration here. So I'm not choosing anything right now here because I don't want any special workflows to be triggered for any special workflow emails to be triggered for this particular transfer. The second type of approver, second step, they have defined the dynamic group. And in the dynamic group, they have defined talent approval. This is a group which is created. So let's look at some dynamic groups here. To check the dynamic groups, you will go to workflow, manage workflow groups. In manage workflow groups, you can see all the dynamic groups which are defined here. Let's see the talent approval. So in the talent approval group, you can see you can define there is Tessa Walker and Christine Dolan, which is defined here, and that's why when you are hitting the workflows, the user which is the approval which is coming is Tessa Walker and Christine Dolan. So this is the talent approval group. So to define you can define your own groups here. Let me show you that. We talked about this earlier, but we show you. So I want to define, suppose, HR group, and I want to define a category as user. I want to give name here as Tessa Walker. I want to give another name as Christine Dolan. Like that, you can define the existing group, or you can define the group based on the different fields here. So for example, you can define the group based on the company, based on the cost center, department, division, employee class, job classification, location, and other fields. So right now I'm not defining it with that, so I will just define a Tessa Walker and Christine Dolan, and then you can also exclude some people from the group here if you want to. So I want to say exclude anybody who is in the country Poland, then I can exclude it here in this group, and I can save this. So right now I'm not doing that. So this is HR approval group is formed. HR group. So this is formed here. You can also copy this group, clone this group basically, and you can delete this group. So I do not want to use it. I will delete this group, or I will cancel this. Okay, this is how you define the dynamic group, and these dynamic groups are used here in this one. And for this dynamic group, for this talent approval, like Christine Dolan and Tessa Walker, they will have only they can edit the attachments, skip this behavior, and no workflow email configuration is required for this as well. Now the third one is the dynamic role. So dynamic role, they have created a dynamic role which is a finance controller. So these are the different type of dynamic role which are already created in the system. So you can also create your own dynamic role. To create a dynamic role, you have to again go to manage org and pay structure. And here you will come to dynamic role, and you can see finance controller dynamic role. So if I see this role is created, and this is for the legal entity 1710, and the approvers are William J.M. Chile, Total Rewards Corporate, US Philadelphia. Similarly, you can define your own dynamic role. So let me define it my own dynamic role, and I say HR HRBP, and I define dynamic role name as HRBP. HRBP description is HRBP, and this I am defining it for my own legal entity, Western USA, and I am defining it approver type person. For example, there is no person hired in 9999, so we will not see anybody. So we will not see anybody in this particular group, but for 9999 we can define this particular approver type is, for example, person, dynamic group, or position. You can define it by a person, you can define it by a position, or you can define it by a dynamic group. So I'm just removing this because there is no person yet assigned to this illegal entity. Let me go to this approver type. I'm just simply defining a person, and I'm defining a Tessa Walker here. So it will give me the name of the person, and similarly, if I want to see Tessa Walker's position, so I go to Tessa Walker, and I will check her position now. I will go to employment section, and you can check this is the position number for her. So I will copy this position, and I can, instead of a person, I can define a position, and I can select a position here. It will say HRBP partner global. So I can define this thing and save this record. And I can also define different type of dynamic role based on the job classification, department, division, location, legal entity, business unit, cost center, pay grade, pay group, event reason, etc. I'm saving this now. So this our dynamic role HRBP is there. So let's select if it is there. HRBP. See, it is there. Okay. So then comes to the contributors. So in the contributors tab, these are the people who can contribute when the workflow is getting approved. So for example, Lisa Felix, they have given a person in the contributor type. Also you can choose a role, dynamic group, person, position, and position relationship. And in the person, contributor type person, they have chosen Lisa Felix, executive assistant. So she will be the one who can contribute in when these workflows are getting approved. She can write her comments in the workflow. Then comes the CC role. There is no CC role defined. So CC role is basically related to when the workflow is completely approved. At that time, who should receive the email notification. So for example, the workflow is approved by finance controller. Then at that time I want a manager to to be informed to have this email notification. In that case I will say role, CC role manager, employee source, and I will save this workflow. So this is how you define the workflow in the system. Let's go and now define one workflows. So I will give 9999 workflow ID, TRANSFER, transfer. I will define the transfer only. Remind in days 3 is delegate supported, yes. Escalation, I will choose the existing escalation promotion without pay change. And then I will say approver type as role. And in the role you can see there are different options available: self, manager, manager's manager, employee, HR, matrix manager, custom manager, second manager. I will choose manager here. Context as source, no added, skip this step, employee relationship, respect permission as yes. And then in the second step I will choose role again, and I will choose, instead of manager I will choose employee HR this time. Source employee source employees HR, then no edit, skip this step, employer relationship to approver is employee, respect permission no, etc. And in the CC role I will define manager's manager because I have not defined anywhere the manager's manager, so I want him to be in copied when this workflow is getting executed. Okay, so this is how you will define the workflow. Now let us look at the escalation. To define the escalation matrix, you will have to go to manage data. In manage data, you have escalation. So here you can see there are two promotion without pay change. So these are the escalations which are defined. So this is the escalation name, this is the code, and then step 1, initiator. So escalation will be routed from initiator and it will go to manager in 5 days. Escalation after 5 days it will go to manager, and from manager, whosoever is the current approver, it will go to manager's manager after another 5 days, and from another 5 days it will go from manager's manager to the HR. So you can see these changes here, and you can also introduce one other step, HR. After HR you want to introduce managers. So we have already consumed managers manager in HR, so we don't want any other additional step. But if you want to have only 2 steps, you can delete this, or if you want to keep it, you can keep it like this. So these are the 3 escalations which are created. So after each 5 days this escalation will be triggered. Now let's look at the some of the workflows which are triggered in the system, and how they are configured in the backend.